Welcome everyone. We are going to learn Halacha on what happened when meat and dairy coming in contact with each other, and how to nullify the flavor of the milk or the flavor of the meat. So we previously learned of a scenario where the meat and dairy were cold and touching each other, or if they were dry, didn't have any liquid, if one of them was moist, how do we handle it? But the discussion today is what happened when the milk, for example, was spilled into meat, and the meat was hot. And what does it mean to be hot? How much of a heat that is considered hot? So a drop of milk that fell onto a piece of meat that is hot, and hot means that the hand recoils from its heat. So if you were to touch the meat, your hand would recoil right away. It's 109.4 Celsius Fahrenheit and 43 Celsius. That's the minimal heat for that considers that the hand recoils, and that's what considers hot in Halacha terminology. 109.4 Fahrenheit, that's considered hot. And if the meat has 60 times the amount of the milk that was spilled into, so let's say it's a big pot roast and a little bit of milk spilled into it, so you have 60 times the amount of meat. So the flavor of the milk was nullified by the overwhelming amount of meat that is in the pot. So then you're allowed to eat the meat, and because there's no flavor of milk, the flavor was nullified. What happens if there isn't 60 times the amount? Everything becomes prohibited. Why? Because the milk penetrates the meat, and if you were to eat it, you would taste the flavor of the milk in the meat. And this is also vice versa. If a piece of meat fell into boiling milk, first of all, you have to take it out. So try to find it, take out the piece of meat that fell into the pot of milk. And if there's 60 times the amount, meaning there's more milk than 60 times more milk than meat, then it will be permissible to drink that milk, again, because the flavor of the meat is nullified by the tremendous amount of milk, or the overwhelming amount of milk. In general, a disclaimer: when it comes to the laws of meat and dairy, it's very intricate and complex. So it's important to ask, if you have the situation that it happens, it's important to ask a rabbi just to make sure that you're doing the right thing. If you have a pot that was primarily used for meat, or that meat rested in that pot for 24 hours, immediately that pot absorbs the flavor of meat. So you bought a pot from the store, took a piece of meat, you placed it in the pot for 24 hours, that pot now has flavor of meat. Even though you washed it, you cleaned it, it's absorbed in the walls of the pot, flavor of meat. And this flavor of meat, once you clean the pot, lasts in the pot for 24 hours. And if you use that pot within the 24 hours, you use that pot for milk. So just to to give an example, so you're buying a new pot. It doesn't have to be a new pot, but let's say you bought a new pot. You placed a piece of meat, you cooked it with meat. The meat stayed in the pot for 24 hours. The pot the pot absorbs the flavor of the meat. Then you cleaned up the pot. You washed it. And then you use that same pot for milk. But it was within the 24 hours. So Sunday morning, you cleaned up the pot from the meat. Sunday night, you cooked something that is dairy in that pot. Pot was clean. There was no meat in it. Cleaned it well. Still, there's a flavor of meat in the walls of the pot, in the pot itself. And the milk that you cooked will be prohibited, and you need to kosher that pot. How to kosher the pot? It's a whole different halacha, but you need to know that this pot is not good. You have to kosher it. But if 24 hours passed, the flavor is still in there, but it's not considered a pleasant flavor. It's not an enhancing flavor. It's detrimental flavor. It's called in the language of in halacha language is called tam pogum. So it's not adding anything to the pot. It's not adding anything to the dish that you're making. It's actually maybe even ruining it, or not enhancing it. It's called tam pogum. Why? Because 24 hours already passed from the time that you took out the piece of meat and you cleaned the pot. A general pot that you're not sure if it was used in the last 24 hours for anything meat or milk. So it's considered like we are giving it the presumption that you never used. It's a vessel that was not used. And therefore, the flavor that we are presuming that it has is a flavor that is pogum. It's a blemished flavor that is not going to enhance the food that you are going to add into that pot, that you're going to cook in that pot. Now, when you're cooking milk, dairy product in that pot that has a tam pogum that has a blemished, non-enhancing flavor of meat in the pot, because 24 hours already went by from the last time it was used. So you are not transgressing the prohibition of cooking meat and dairy. Biblically, you are not transgressing the prohibition of not to cook meat and dairy, because it's a tam pogum. First of all, it's not there that you see. It's only a flavor that exists in the walls of the pot. And 24 hours went by, so it's not an enhancing flavor. But the rabbis prohibited us from using these types of pots. Why? Meaning you can use the pot, if it's a meat pot, you can use it for meat. But even though you can argue, look, 24 hours went by, it was clean, it's not going to enhance the flavor, but so biblically it's fine. But rabbinically, the rabbi said no, because they made a fence. They were concerned that you will come to use it if you get used to using pots, dairy pots for meat or meat for dairy. You're gonna end up using it even though the 24 hours didn't go by. So although it's prohibited rabbinically to use the meat pot for dairy, even after the 24 hours, if you erred and you used it, the rabbis did not prohibit the dish, the dairy dish that was cooked in that pot, unless, one exemption to the rule, if the dish that you cooked was a spicy, hot dish, then it would be a problem. Sharp. Thank you. Sharp, spicy. But you, regardless, you would need to kosher that pot, since it was used. And koshering means to do agala. Agala would means to it's a process of cleaning it, then putting it in boiling water, and then pouring cold water on it as a process which is a separate halacha. But the point is that we have the rule of 24 hours, that within the 24 hours it's enhancing the flavor. After 24 hours it's detrimental flavor, it's a blemish flavor, it's not adding. Biblically it will be okay, rabbinically it's not okay to use it. If you used it within the 24 hours, the dish is not good, you cannot eat it still, and you gotta kosher the pot.
Welcome.
And if 24 hours went by, you're not allowed to use it rabbinically. And if you cooked something, you'll be allowed to eat the dish unless it was a spicy, sharp food, and the pot needed to be kosher regardless, since the mixture it was once used for meat and now using it for dairy. So to bring it back to a neutral state, that you can decide what you want to use it, you have to do agala, you have to kosher the pot. We're going to have a Tanya class right after this video, and daily Parsha and Ein Yaakov to follow. Bruchim to you.